All right, part three. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. We are talking about energy and chemical reactions. So first, we've gone over um, units of energy and converting between different kinds of units. We have exothermic and endothermic to describe whether heat is released in exothermic or heat energy is absorbed in endothermic. We've talked about bond energies and using bond energies to calculate the heat of reaction. Now we're going to be looking at energy diagrams. As we've seen a little bit already, like this is an energy diagram. So now we have here some generalized energy diagrams showing exothermic and endothermic. So on the left, notice again we have energy as the y-axis, reaction progress as the x-axis, and we have some kind of abstract arbitrary line here representing reactants, and then products have some potential energy down here as represented by this line. Now the difference between these two lines is delta H of the reaction. And in this case, right, heat is released because the products have lower energy, and so delta H should be a negative value, right? And so here it's equal to the energy of the products minus the energy of the reactants. The products have lower energy than the reactants, so we get a negative value here. Notice that this is different. Bond energies was the sum of bonds of reactants minus the sum of bonds of products. This is products, energy of products minus energy of reactants. So just be careful which one you're doing. But you should know that if it's negative, it's exothermic, right? So the point of this little hill here that has to go up first will come in the next few sections. For now, we're just looking at the difference between the lines of reactants and products, right? So if energy goes down, we have products minus reactants negative, and it's exothermic. And on the right here in B, reactants are lower than products, and so the delta H, if we take products minus reactants, would be a positive value, and we get an endothermic, right? Heat is required, or energy is required to go to products. And again, the little hump here will come up in the future. For now, we're focusing on the difference between products and reactants. So the energy diagram traces the energy pathway leading from reactants to products. The heat of reaction is the vertical distance measured between the reactants and products. So here's a nice summary slide. Oops, here we go. Of an exothermic reaction. The product releases energy to the reaction releases energy to form the products. The potential energy has decreased. The products are more stable than the reactants. Delta H is negative. And endothermic would be opposite of every point there, right? Okay, here's a few questions. Practice exercise 6.3. Is each reaction endothermic or exothermic? So in A, it says 8H2S reacts to form, actually it's a decomposition, right? 8H2 plus S8. And now the information given is that heat is absorbed. Okay, well, if heat is absorbed, that's right there, that we know, right? We don't have to calculate anything or look at a number. Heat is absorbed means it's endothermic. So B is another decomposition reaction. 2CO2 decomposes into CO and O2, and here delta H value is given. It says delta H is a positive 566. So that means energy has to be put in to the system. You could draw it like this, right? And so that would again be endothermic. multiple choice. In an energy diagram for a reaction, the products are shown at a higher level than the reactants. What must be true about this reaction? What must be true? Pause and answer for yourself. Okay, so if the products are at a higher level than the reactants, then that means that the reaction must absorb energy to form the products. The other four answers here all apply to, well, what else? Yeah, so also this means it's endothermic, right? The other four answers here all apply to exothermic reactions. So one, it is exothermic, or delta H is negative, which means the potential energy has decreased. The products are more stable than the reactants. Those are all exothermic cases. So the answer is A. So one way that we can account for heat or energy in the actual chemical reaction is to put it as part of the reaction. So if we know that endothermic reactions require heat to go, then heat is almost like a reactant. So you can put heat in as a reactant. So heat plus H2S on the left side. For exothermic reactions, heat is a product. So you can put plus heat in the reaction equation. This will be useful when we move to equilibrium, but we can start thinking about it that way now. It's also easy to see if heat or energy is on the left, on the reactant side, then we know it's endothermic. If heat is released or it's a product, then we know it's exothermic. Okay. So another context of energy is back to calories and the calorie content of food. So we can use the heat of reaction, delta H reaction. It's the same amount of energy that is provided to your cells when you eat and metabolize food. So that's really just like the food that you take in, your body breaks bonds and uses the atoms and small molecules to do different things or build up different molecules. And different biomolecules have different calorie content. So carbohydrates, like rice, potatoes, bread, have a calorie content of 4 kilocal per gram. So if you had a gram of carbohydrate, it would have 4 kilocal content or energy stored in it. Proteins are also 4 calories per gram, and fats are 9 calories per gram. And so if you look at a nutrition label here again, right, we can see total calories in this example, and you can do this for anything that you find in your pantry, right? We have 150 total calories, and I have 1.5 grams of fat. It has 30 grams of carbohydrate and 5 grams of protein. So we can actually use these three values of fats, carbohydrates, and proteins to calculate the total calories, right? So if we look at the fat content, we have 1.5 grams, and we have 9 calories per gram, which would be 13.5 calories. 30 grams of carbohydrates at 4 calories per gram is 120 calories from carbs, and 5 gram of protein at 4 calories per gram is 20 calories accounted for. So if we add these up, right, it's 153.5 calories, and rounded to the nearest 10th place, which is common on labels. You'll never see something down to the single digit ones place, but that would round to 150 calories, which we see right here in the label. So that's where that came from. And if it's kind of blocked here by the label, but I think it says calories from fat as I think it says 15 there. which would be rounded up from 13.5. So that's approximately right. So you should be able to look at a label that often it says calories from fat, and it also has total fat content. And notice that it'll be the calories from fat will be 9 to 10 times more than the grams. So it's 1.5 here and it's 15 here. Let's go back to that Cheez-Its label and see if we can verify this. Okay, yeah, so here total fat is 4.5 grams. It says calories from fat is 40. And if we did 4.5 times 9, it would be 40.5. And so it's rounded to 40. We could do the same here, right? We could say um, we should be able to take the total carbs times 4, total protein times 4, fat times 9, and it should add up to 130. I haven't actually checked this yet. Let's try it. So 3 grams of protein times 4 calories per gram plus 20 grams of carbs times 4 calories per gram plus 40, which we know is, or 4.5 times 9 calories per gram for fat, and it equals 132.5, which would round to 130 calories, right? So you can actually make some sense of where these numbers come from on a label. So we know calories from uh, fat, carbohydrates, and protein. We can use an instrument to measure these things, though. Ultimately, they had to have been measured at some point, right? So a calorimeter measures the delta H reaction for combustion reactions, and you can do this with food. Pretty clever. So you'd put a little food sample, dried food sample inside the chamber, and then the chamber would be surrounded by water, right? A little bit of oxygen is put in there and a spark, and it triggers a combustion reaction. So you see it in the figure here, like the little uh, nuts are burning. So that's going to release heat into the chamber, and that heat will then be released out to the water, and the water will be warmed. You can measure the temperature of the water, and using the change in the water temperature and knowledge about how much energy is required to change water's temperature, delta H can be back calculated from delta T, or the change in temperature. So this is a very common experiment to do in a lab. You can even do it simply like in a coffee cup sometimes. And you would burn some piece of food and measure the temperature change of the water. If you know the mass of water, then you can determine the energy required to heat the water, which is equal to the energy released by the reaction. So that's how we get these kinds of numbers. Okay, one more thing is a brief overview of energy and metabolism. So energy is very important, and there are different pathways. One is the catabolic pathway. So this would take large molecules that you would, probably that you would eat, carbohydrates, proteins, fats, convert these into smaller molecules. So we're going to break down biomolecules, and that would release ATP, special energy carrying molecules. Then those small molecules can be built into larger molecules from the small ones, which would require energy, right, to build up new proteins, lipids, DNA, things like that. It uses the energy produced and released from catabolism and ATP to then make the large molecules. So here's a pretty cool diagram. So it shows we have large molecules, carbohydrates, proteins, and fats that you get from your food. And They will be broken down into small molecules. Now we know that breaking bonds requires energy, but um, it's also going to be producing ATP, which are like energy carrying molecules. So we have small molecules, and then uh, they will be put back together in a certain way. So making bonds releases energy, but you still have requires energy to like get everything set up just right. And so the anabolic pathway builds large molecules back up, but now it's the ones that our body builds, right? That we need and want. And all through this whole process and this mechanism um, is keeping track of energy because energy must be conserved. Okay, this wraps up lecture 6.1 and section 6.1 in your textbook.